My sister demanded my savings for her dream clinic, then one email froze everything. Sign it, or don't bother coming to the opening. That was what my sister said to me while holding a champagne flute in the lobby of a clinic I had practically paid to build. 10 seconds later, she shoved me off the loading dock. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at a hospital ceiling the color of dirty paper. My wrist was strapped into a splint. There was dried blood behind my ear. My shoulder felt like it had been packed with broken glass. And my phone was vibrating so hard on the metal tray beside me that it sounded angry. The text on the screen was from my brother-in-law. Brielle is traumatized. You ruined our moment. Stay away from us until you apologize. Not, are you conscious? Not, did the ambulance come? Not, just outrage that my body had interrupted their celebration. I read the message once. Then I opened the loan email chain marked Clear to Fund, attached my emergency room discharge papers, and hit reply all. I did not argue. I opened the file. To understand why that one email destroyed their future, you need to understand where the money came from. I am 33 years old, and I work as a commercial loan analyst for a regional bank in Seattle. My job is not glamorous. Nobody claps for it. Nobody films it for social media. I sit under cold office lighting and read financial statements, tax returns, debt schedules, guarantor statements, operating agreements, and SBA packages until the numbers either make sense or expose somebody. That is what I am good at. I know how people sound when they want money. I know how they look on paper when they are trying to seem stable, responsible, and low risk. And I know the exact moment a story stops matching the numbers. The $94,000 I had saved was not casual money. It was not extra. It was not just sitting there. It was 10 years of discipline made visible. It was the apartment I did not upgrade. The vacations I did not take. The old car I kept driving because it still worked. The meals I packed instead of buying. The raises I banked instead of spending. The quiet little decisions nobody congratulates you for because they look boring from the outside. That savings account was not luxury. It was safety. It was the life raft I built, one careful dollar at a time, because I grew up in a family where emergency was a permanent climate. But to my sister Brielle, it was never safety. To her, it was family money. And that phrase sounds generous until you hear how people like Brielle actually use it. What they mean is not, we share. What they mean is, you earn, I access. 3 months before the hospital, Brielle came to my condo with a white leather folder and a smile so polished it barely looked real. Nolan came with her, carrying coffees and acting supportive in the smooth, harmless way he had perfected over the years. Brielle wanted to open a luxury veterinary rehabilitation clinic in Bellevue. Not just a clinic. The way sane people say clinic. A brand. A destination. A statement. She said those words exactly like that while spreading out renderings across my dining table. Glass walls, hydrotherapy pool, underwater treadmill, recovery suites, designer reception desk, warm, minimalist finishes, premium boarding, a coffee bar for pet owners, soft lighting for content. Everything about it was designed for two audiences: anxious, wealthy clients and strangers on Instagram. I asked the only question that mattered. What do the numbers look like? Brielle waved one hand as if numbers were a slightly rude detail. Nolan leaned in and gave me the cleaned-up version. The bank liked the concept, he said. The market was strong. The need was real. The projections were promising. That was all technically possible. The problem was the file. Brielle's credit was weak. Nolan's income history was unstable. Their liquidity was thin for the size of the project. Their own cash contribution was unimpressive, and worse, inconsistent. They had enthusiasm, taste, and confidence. Lenders cannot collateralize confidence, so the loan needed one thing: a strong guarantor, someone with documented reserves, stable income, clean credit, and the kind of financial profile that makes underwriters unclench their jaws. That someone was me. If this hits close to home, like quietly, I should have said no. I know that now with the kind of clarity that only arrives after damage. But our father had died the year before, and grief makes people easier to steer. It softens the edges of judgment. It makes you more vulnerable to any request dressed as loyalty. My father's last clear conversation with me happened in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and weak coffee. He was tired, frightened, and trying to make peace with the fact that he was leaving too soon. He squeezed my hand and told me to look after Brielle. He said she was impulsive, but she meant well. He said I was the practical one, the strong one, the one who knew how to keep life from flying off the rails. If you have ever been called the strong one in a dysfunctional family, you know it is rarely praise. Usually it means your pain will be expected to remain quiet because other people are planning to build on it. So I told myself I was honoring him. I signed the limited guarantee. Then I wired $40,000 for the initial equity injection. Then 18,000 more when build-out costs came in above estimate. Then another 11,000 when Brielle decided the standard finishes looked budget and would hurt the brand. And every time I hesitated, she had a script ready. This is temporary. We'll pay you back after launch. The business needs to look right from day one. You know Dad would want us to do this together. I thought family showed up for each other. That last line always came wrapped in disappointment, as if my only options were obedience or moral failure. Meanwhile, I would sit at work all day reading serious loan files from people who had spent years building actual businesses. Then I would look at my phone and see Brielle posting photos from the construction site wearing a hard hat over curled hair, holding a champagne flute in rooms that still smelled like adhesive and paint. Building our empire, one caption said. Our. That word started to make me feel sick, because when a bill was due, it was never our debt. When a wire had to go out, it was never our urgency. When a vendor wanted payment or a contractor needed approval, suddenly I was the one being called. At 11 p.m. At 6. On Sundays. On work days. Always with panic. Always with urgency. Always with the assumption that my stability was a utility they could switch on whenever they needed power. The first receipts were small. A midnight text from Brielle. Need 5. 8K by morning. The cheaper reception stone looks terrible on camera. A voicemail from Nolan. Soft and reassuring. Don't stress. Just float the difference and we'll true it up after opening. An email from a supplier asking why the owner-approved upgrade had not been funded. An invoice with line items I had never agreed to. A revised budget that somehow never included the expensive additions until after they had already been selected. Nothing dramatic enough on its own to make me blow up the deal, but enough to tell a story. And I work in risk. I know how stories form. The dangerous files are not always the loud ones. Most of the time they are death by pattern, small assumptions, tiny omissions, a little entitlement here, a little pressure there, a belief that the rules are not exactly rules if someone more responsible can be guilted into absorbing the consequences. So I saved everything. Every email, every invoice, every text, every little late-night demand that treated my savings like a faucet. Not because I was plotting revenge. Because documentation is what people begin collecting when trust has died but obligation has not caught up yet. The final walkthrough happened 48 hours before closing. The clinic was almost finished. The place was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are. White tile, frosted glass, brushed steel, warm pendant lighting, a reception desk with imported stone I had not wanted to pay for. The hydrotherapy pool gleamed under recessed lights. It looked polished enough to convince a stranger that it had been built on vision instead of extraction. Outside, by the loading entrance, a contractor security camera blinked blue. Theo, the general contractor, had mentioned it weeks earlier. Motion activated, cloud storage, audio included. Too much specialized equipment had gone missing from nearby projects, so his company installed cameras on every high-value site. At the time, it barely registered. Later, it would matter more than anything Brielle had ever posted in her life. When I arrived, Brielle's white SUV was parked right out front. She was already filming. Ring light clipped to her phone. Full makeup. Cream coat. Nolan standing beside her with an iced coffee, smiling when prompted, quiet when unnecessary. They looked like people rehearsing wealth. They also looked like people already spending money they had not earned. Brielle lowered her phone when she saw me, and smiled that bright, frictionless smile she used when something had already been decided for me. Perfect, she said. You're here. I knew that tone. It was the tone she used when she had hidden the bad part until the room made refusal inconvenient. She led us into the rehab wing like she was revealing a masterpiece. Nolan followed with the clipboard. We stopped beside the hydrotherapy room, and Brielle clapped once, almost playfully. Tiny surprise, she said. We upgraded to the underwater treadmill package. My stomach dropped. How much? Only another 48,000. Only. Then Nolan handed me the clipboard. Revised guarantor acknowledgement. Updated cost summary. New total exposure. My signature line waiting at the bottom like a trap door. I looked at the numbers, and that familiar professional calm settled over me. The kind I feel at work when a borrower tries to hide risk behind optimism. The project was already stretched. The debt assumptions were already thin. The margin for error was already too narrow for comfort. This upgrade did not strengthen the business. It made the file weaker. And they knew it. That was why they waited until 2 days before closing. Pressure works best when the victim believes saying no will destroy everything. I handed the clipboard back. No. For 1 second, nobody moved. Nolan blinked like he had misheard me. What do you mean, no? I mean the numbers don't work. Brielle laughed once, sharply. It's for the business. No, I said. It's for the image. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for the polite mask to slip and show the entitlement underneath. You always do this. Do what? Make us feel like beggars. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The coat? You asked me for $94,000, I said. That's not a feeling, that's arithmetic. Nolan shifted beside her, already trying to shrink into harmlessness. That was his specialty. He let Brielle be the blade while he played the soft background music that made people doubt whether they had really been cut. Then Brielle stepped closer. And what happened next is why people end up hating her the moment they hear this story. Because she did not lash out blindly. She selected her cruelty. You're 33, Mara, she said softly. You live alone. You go home to an empty condo. Each sentence landed with the precision of something chosen in advance. Then she tilted her head. So what are you even saving for? If you won't use your money to help family, what's the point of you? There are moments when cruelty becomes so efficient it stops feeling emotional and starts feeling clinical. That was one of them. She had not lost control. She had aimed. And Nolan heard every word. He did not tell her to stop. He did not tell her to step back. He did not say, Brielle, enough. He looked down. That was the moment I stopped protecting him in my own head. For months I had told myself he was passive, weak, trapped by her personality. But weakness is not innocence. Silence is not innocence either. Not when it stands beside abuse and lets it keep talking. I took one breath and said, my answer is still no. She shoved me. Hard. There was nothing ambiguous about it. Her hands hit the center of my chest with enough force to throw me backward before my brain fully registered the movement. My heel slipped off the metal edge of the loading dock. The world tilted. Then the concrete came up too fast. My hip hit first. Then my wrist. Then the side of my head cracked against a boxed pallet of tile samples. For 1 second, there was no sound. Then everything arrived at once. Pain. Ringing. Dust in my mouth. Heat behind my eyes. The taste of blood. I tried to push myself up, and my wrist answered with a flash of pain so sharp it turned the edges of the room white. Above me, Brielle stood on the platform staring down. I saw fear on her face for less than a second. Then calculation replaced it. Nolan stepped forward. Don't touch her, Brielle snapped, grabbing his sleeve. She'll blame us. He looked at me. He looked at the blood. He looked at his wife. And then he chose her. They left before the ambulance got there. That is the part that makes people the angriest when they hear this story. Not just the shove. The leaving. Because a shove can still be lied about. Leaving a bleeding woman on concrete after hearing the crack of her body hit tells the truth all by itself. At the hospital, the physician assistant cleaned the cut near my temple while a nurse wrapped my wrist. The doctor read the findings in that calm, clinical voice medical people use when they know panic helps nobody. Concussion. Wrist fracture. Severe contusions. Work restrictions. Estimated recovery. 3 months. 3 months. For most people, that sounds like an inconvenience. For someone tied to a loan guarantee, it translates instantly into lending language. Material adverse change. My income was part of the credit support. My financial stability was part of what made the file work. If that changed before closing, I had a legal obligation to disclose it. That was not revenge. That was compliance. Then my phone buzzed again. A lender notification. Borrower equity injection received $30,000. I stared at it for a long second. Brielle had always said she had no extra money. Every upgrade, every demand, every emergency had been framed as unavoidable because there was supposedly nothing left. Apparently that had been a lie too. Comment one word, receipts. That was the moment the whole story changed shape in my head. Until then, a part of me was still clinging to the softer version. The version where I was helping two reckless people chase a dream and getting hurt in the process. But dreams do not look like hidden cash, strategic guilt, and a shove over a signature line. This was not a dream. It was extraction. And I was the resource. I opened the email chain marked clear to fund. Loan officer. Underwriter. SBA specialist. Closing attorney. Title company. Everyone copied. I attached the discharge papers, the work restriction note, and a photo of the splint. Then I wrote exactly what needed to be written. No family history. No emotion. No accusations. Just risk. Just fact. As guarantor, I am obligated to disclose a sudden medical event resulting in temporary income disruption and physician-imposed work restrictions. I cannot execute closing documents without lender review of this material adverse change. Supporting documentation attached. Then I hit send. I remember sitting there in that hospital bed, face swollen, wrist throbbing, grit still in my hair, and feeling something I had not felt in months. Relief. Because for the first time, I had stopped trying to save people who were comfortable destroying me. The next morning, my phone started vibrating before sunrise. Missed calls, texts, voicemails, threats disguised as panic. Pick up, call the lender back. Tell them you were medicated. You can't ruin us over an accident. That word again? Accident. As if repetition could sand the edges off reality. I ignored all of it and waited. At 7:42 a.m., the first email arrived. Notice of funding suspension. The SBA loan had been frozen pending re-underwrite due to undisclosed material adverse change affecting guarantor support. Frozen. Not delayed. Not paused. Frozen. I stared at that word and felt my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. Then the second email came. This one was from the closing attorney. Brielle and Nolan had waived key financing protections to make their offer stronger and more competitive. They were so certain I would sign, so certain I would keep rescuing them, that they removed the safety net themselves. When the funding failed, the contract did not bend. It bit. The seller was retaining the full $60,000 deposit as liquidated damages. Gone. Just like that. $60,000 evaporated because they had built their confidence on permanent access to me. I should tell you something ugly here. A small part of me still hurt for my sister, even in that moment. That is what long-term family exploitation does. It trains compassion to survive in places where self-respect should have been allowed to grow. But then Brielle went live on Instagram, and whatever softness I had left died on the spot. She was in the front seat of her SUV, mascara running in elegant streaks, voice shaking just enough to sound sincere to strangers. She told thousands of viewers I had attacked her at the clinic. She said I was jealous. She said I was unstable. She said I had sabotaged her future. Then she implied she might be pregnant without saying it directly, letting the comments do the lying for her. People flooded the chat with sympathy. Some offered money. Some told her to sue me. Some called me a monster without even knowing my last name. And there, pinned under the video, was a donation link. She was turning the crime she committed against me into content. There is a kind of evil that is loud and easy to spot. And then there is the kind that can leave you bleeding on concrete and cry online 10 hours later for donations. That second kind is harder to explain, but once you see it, you never confuse charm with goodness again. I did not comment. I did not report the video. I called Theo. Theo, I said when he answered, does that side camera record audio? He was silent for half a second. Then he said, you need the loading dock feed. Yes, I already pulled it. That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because it meant someone else had seen it clearly too. Someone else had looked at what happened and understood it for what it was. He emailed the file while we were still on the phone. When I opened it, the angle was perfect. Timestamp in the corner. Clear view of the loading platform. Clear audio. Brielle handing me the revised form. Me saying no. Her insulting my life. Her saying, what's the point of you? Then the shove. The fall. Nolan stepping forward. Brielle stopping him. And then, the line that finished them both. As they walked toward the SUV, still in range of the microphone, Nolan whispered, we're in trouble. And Brielle said, not if you stick to the story. She slipped. That was the moment a lie turned into evidence. I sent the clip to the detective assigned to the hospital report. Then I sent it to the closing attorney. Then I sent a copy to the lender's special assets contact with one line. Please preserve all borrower representations and communications related to this transaction. That is the thing about adults with licenses. They do not care who cried first. They care what can be documented. By that afternoon, the loan file status changed again. Compliance review. That phrase looks boring if you do not work in lending. To me, it looked like steel doors closing. Brielle thought she was fighting me. She was no longer fighting me. She was fighting underwriting, compliance, a police report, an attorney, a contract, and a cloud-saved recording with audio. And none of those could be manipulated with mascara. The detective called around 4. He asked if I wanted to pursue charges. Yes. He asked whether the footage accurately reflected the incident. Yes. He asked whether Brielle had made statements contradicting the footage. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Understood." That evening, police arrested Brielle for assault and filing a false report. Nolan was not handcuffed that night, but what came for him was slower and, in some ways, worse. Because the more the file was examined, the worse he looked. He had signed certifications. He had approved revised costs. He had represented that funding sources were stable and understood. And buried in the follow-up requests, it came out that the underwater treadmill package was tied to a side equipment obligation they had not fully disclosed. That was the hidden motive. They were not just greedy. They were cornered. And they needed my signature to absorb the blast. The clinic never opened. The loan file closed permanently. The deposit was gone. The project died under the weight of its own dishonesty. Brielle's audience vanished almost as quickly as it had gathered. Sponsors pulled away. Comments turned vicious once the arrest report surfaced. Nolan started calling from unknown numbers. The first voicemail sounded desperate. The second sounded ashamed. The third sounded transactional. That was the one where he said, "You know how Brielle gets. Maybe if you just clarify things." Clarify. As if my blood on the loading dock had simply been poor communication. I blocked every number after that. 6 months later, I sat in court with a healed wrist, a thin scar near my temple, and a kind of peace I had not known in years. Brielle stood before the judge in clothes that still looked expensive but no longer looked convincing. She accepted a plea: probation, restitution, mandatory counseling, criminal record. The court ordered repayment for my medical bills and lost wages. But the real punishment was bigger than the sentence. The deposit was gone. The business was dead. Her credibility was broken. And for the first time in her life, tears did not create access. They created paperwork. Nolan sat in the gallery looking smaller than I had ever seen him. That was the day I understood something I wish more people learned earlier. The enabler is not neutral. The enabler is the bridge the abuser walks across. Brielle was the weapon. Nolan was the unlocked door. After court, I moved to a quieter apartment near the water. Smaller place, better life. No designer finishes, no performance, no one asking me to prove love with a wire transfer. One night, I opened my banking app while standing barefoot in my kitchen. The number was not perfect, but it was mine. Mine. Do you know how powerful that word becomes after someone spends months treating your labor like a public utility? I made tea and stood by the window while city lights shook on the dark water. For the first time in a long time, silence did not feel lonely. It felt expensive. Not because it cost money, because I had finally stopped paying for noise. 3 weeks later, Nolan sent a letter. Actual paper. My name written on the envelope in his careful handwriting. Once upon a time, I would have opened it immediately. I would have felt guilty, responsible, curious, hooked. Instead, I stood over the recycling bin and held it for a moment. I already knew what it said. Some version of, "I'm sorry, she manipulated me. I was trapped too. Can you help me get back on my feet?" That is the anthem of every coward who stood beside cruelty and now wants credit for regret. I didn't open it. I dropped it into the bin and went back upstairs. Some endings do not need witnesses, just boundaries. That night, my friend Tessa brought soup. Theo came by to check a leak under my sink. We ate in my small kitchen with the windows cracked and the air smelling like rain. These people did not share my blood. They shared something better: decency. When I was hurt, Theo sent me evidence. When I was scared, Tessa showed up with groceries and silence, and never once asked me to minimize what happened just to keep the peace. That is how I learned the difference between family and appetite. One loves you, the other consumes you. Subscribe for more stories where receipts win.